Well, this is embarrassing. So last week I talked about a new design direction for Stick Ninjas and a new mechanic that was going to be sort of a central part of the game where you would draw the landscapes that your stick figures were fighting on. And I thought this was going to be a great design, but actually, as it turns out, it's hugely problematic. And so in this episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about why it's problematic, how I got to this point and only figured out that it's problematic now, and also what I'm going to do going forward. So let's rewind right back to the start of the development process. So to begin with, it's a stick figure fighting game, and drawing things fits in well with the theme of that game. So I've always wanted to have some sort of drawing mechanic. And as it turns out, one day in the shower, as it always happens, all the ideas that have been rattling around sort of fell into place, and I came up with an idea for how this would work gameplay-wise that was fun. And so I did some pen and paper prototyping, and which is really easy when you're drawing things, and that was fun. I took a screenshot of the game and drew on top of it in a paint program. Still fun. Anyway, and then I worked on the first bit of actual series prototyping. What I wanted to test was the drawing circle that expands, and so I programmed this quick sort of overlay over the physics engine test, and this was fun. And at this stage, it's very easy to validate that the design was working by simply going in and adding polygons on top of this manual drawing with the old polygon tool, and this was still fun. So then I started doing a little bit of proper engineering work on it. The first thing I did was come up with a line recognition tool, and it's very satisfying to have the computer acknowledge, you've drawn a line, let me show it to you as a nice crisp line, or you've drawn a curve, and so on. And so this was still fun. And then in order to use this in the physics engine, I couldn't just have just plain lines. I needed to do closed shapes and add the ability to build onto and cut into existing shapes. So I did all this engineering work for that, and this was still fun. So this is where I was at the last devlog, and all I had to do was basically integrate this drawing test prototype and the physics prototype, and here's the result of that. And as it turns out, this, unfortunately, is not fun. It's not completely horrible, and it sort of works on a technical level, but gameplay-wise, this doesn't really work. There's something wrong with it, and I think I know what that is. And the problem is basically there are two games here. There's the drawing game, and then there's the platformer game, which of course includes the shooting mechanics. And these two games, instead of sort of adding together and becoming more than the sum of their parts, they actually detract from each other. So just to talk about that for a while, the platforming game is actually placing limits on the drawing game. So for instance, because it's a platformer, it limits what you can draw and where you can draw it, and then when you can draw and how long you have to draw. So you have to draw really quickly in this small circle, and so on. Similarly, the drawing mechanic limits the platforming game. It forces you to stop, jumping around and platforming, so that you can draw, and it reduces the quality of the platforming environment. Something that is being dynamically drawn by players is not going to be as fun a platforming environment as a carefully designed level. Also, when you think about the benefits that each game brings to the other game, there are easier ways to get those benefits. For instance, the benefits that the drawing game is giving to the platforming game could be more easily had by, say, having just good level design to begin with, having dynamic levels that you can script and change. Deployable structures for players is another way to get some of the effects of the drawing system in the just regular platform gameplay. And of course, the big one is just having a really good level editor and making it really easy to share levels between players. looking at the drawing game, I'm reminded of the game The Sims. So The Sims itself is two games. There's the architecture game where you're building a house, and then there's the simulation game where you're like managing your family of people. And one of the design things about The Sims is that the people game is basically a way of evaluating your performance in the architecture game. You know, how good is your house design? You know, are the Sims able to live in it well? So the drawing game that I designed, I don't think that a multiplayer platformer is necessarily the best way to evaluate, you know, the quality of the drawing you've made. And you know, when I started to think about it from this angle, you know, I very quickly came up with a bunch of alternate game ideas that would be far better ways to evaluate what you've drawn. And so I might, you know, look into making some of those later. So, you know, if I was a better game designer, I might have realized these problems, you know, realized that these two mechanics don't mesh together earlier in the design process. But at least I'm good enough, I guess, to spot it now, and hopefully I won't make that same mistake in the future. So I'm sorry if I got anyone's hopes up about that game design. I certainly got mine up. So the next question is, you know, where am I going to go from here with Stick Ninjas? You know, do I take the drawing game and run with that, or do I keep going with the platforming game? And it obviously needs to be the platforming game, because basically I've done almost all the engineering work for that. I've got the multiplayer system, I've got the physics system, and it's all basically ready to go. Whereas the drawing game has really only just started the work for that. I have worried a little bit about how well the platformer shooter will sell. I mean, a drawing system would have made the game a lot more accessible and a lot more unique. And without that, it sort of reverts back to being more of a hardcore game. And that makes me a little uneasy about how marketable that is. But I've decided that, you know, I'm just going to live with that, because I'm happy making a hardcore game. So I've just decided that I will make just a really excellent hardcore game for a more niche audience. And there's always the possibility that the drawing mechanic will make some sort of return, either as a sort of a less central part of the design, or like for example, you know, maybe one of the guns will involve some drawing or something to that effect. Otherwise, you know, as I said, I can leave the drawing game and make a completely other separate game out of it later. So the other thing to decide is basically where should I go with my development schedule. And basically I'm going to leave it as is, because it still works. You remember that last devlog I promised that I'd be doing something special this devlog. And what that is, as you know, I have all of these little prototypes for Stick Ninjas at the moment. There's the networking test, and then there's the physics test, and so on. And it's about time that I took all of those prototypes and I sort of got them together and smashed them into a vaguely game-shaped object. And so all of this week I'm going to be working on this integration step. And every day I'm going to be posting a mini devlog just to show off progress on how that's going. So stay tuned for those. Those will start tomorrow. As always, you can follow my blog at andrewrussell.net. You can follow me on Twitter at _AndrewRussell. You can subscribe to me on YouTube to get notifications when these videos get posted. And you can visit stickninjas.com, and you can sign up there to get a notification when Stick Ninjas is available for playable pre-order. So thank you for watching, and I will see you tomorrow.